Hey, welcome to episode 5 of Researching Happy. This is a podcast all about the stories behind the studies of the research world of happiness and well-being and mental health. Today we've got a fantastic guest, Dr. Addie Wootten, who's the CEO of Smiling Mind, which if you haven't heard of it, which you probably have, is a fantastic mindfulness app. And Addie just has such a great story. I mean, her work is really impressive. Working in schools, we'll hear a lot about the advocacy stuff that she's doing now to government, which I was really surprised by, but obviously thankful for. She covers a lot of like a really classic story, I think now, which is that move from academia into industry and how transferable but difficult the choice is. To take your sort of your research skills and then apply them into the research, into the real world. And she's done just a fantastic job of that, taking the team from a staff of 3 people now to 30 plus. So enjoy the episode. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe and like the episode if you're enjoying it. And yeah, if you think of someone who would enjoy this episode, please just share it with them. Take a quick second to send it to them, and I think that's how we're going to get this thing moving. So really appreciate it. We've had listeners again from lots of different countries around the world, so it's really exciting to see this thing kicking off. Thank you. All right, so let's get started. Welcome. This is Researching Happy with our guest, Addie Wootten. So I've got a little bio here, Addie. Sorry to cut you off already. I'll let you say hi if that's what you're going to say.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Hi, Matt.
Sorry, yeah, and Dr. Addie, I should say. So Addie is a clinical psychologist and CEO of Smiling Mind. She's worked most of her career in clinical psychology practice and research across a range of major hospitals in Melbourne, primarily focused on supporting people with cancer. Throughout her clinical career, Addie has seen firsthand the benefits that mindfulness can provide and used mindfulness personally in her work for many years. She's an experienced researcher and fundraiser and is passionate about her role as CEO, leading Smiling Mind to have the biggest and most beneficial impact possible. So welcome, Addie.
Thank you.
How are things?
Pretty good. I think I always, maybe I'm my own worst critic, but I always judge myself when I feel frantic and overwhelmed, because I think if I'm practicing mindfulness, I should not be feeling that way. But you know what? We're all human, and sometimes the weeks are busy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I was checking some of the YouTube videos that Smiling Mind has, and there was one I just did just before this, had a little bit of time before this, before we started recording, and self-compassion, like just so important. A 2-minute video. It was really, really kind of helpful.
Great. Well, that's good. Yeah, we all need to find time, I think, to slip little bits of like little reminders, I suppose, into our day that, you know, we're doing okay. We should be very grateful for what we have.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't really have anywhere specifically to start, but it would be great just to hear, like, what have you been up to recently?
Oh, that's a big question.
Okay.
So I'm running Smiling Mind. My job is CEO, but I find myself spending a lot. Well, with that job, I spend time on a whole lot of different things. So a week is never the same, really, for me. What we're really trying to work on is, I suppose, thinking about our role in trying to make a difference in reducing the rate of mental ill health, particularly for kids. Mm-hmm. We've been really grappling with we do a lot of work in schools, a lot of work with parents, and what we're hearing from them is that kids are really struggling, and whilst some kids are at that level where they need expert support and care, there's a whole lot of kids that are maybe not meeting that criteria or the threshold, and lots of parents and kids that are unsure about what to do about it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, which means I spend a lot of my time thinking about, well, how on earth are we going to help this situation? It feels like it isn't getting any better. It's probably getting worse, particularly post-pandemic. So, yeah, thinking about our strategy, where we're heading as an organisation, how do we do more with a very small team. How do we get government on board to help us? I've spent a bit of time in Canberra last week trying to talk to politicians about the work that we do, but also more broadly how important kids' mental health is. Yeah, so lots of things. I am definitely up to lots of things.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, it's so exciting. I'm really pleased to be having this conversation firstly, and thank you for making time for this. But that idea, I've had this feedback a few times of like, oh, research. I'm not a researcher, even though you are one. You were one. You are one probably still. That idea that, on this pursuit of researching happiness, there's not just one function, it's all these different functions. And like you talked about, going to Canberra and advocating for these issues is probably 90% of the battle. How was that? Can we go to Canberra first?
Yeah, sure. How was it? Well, and I think to your point is a really interesting one that in my career with researching, I was in a very specialised space, and the frustration that I had was that you could do this amazing research, but then what happens once you publish the paper? Like, the reason you do research is to actually change things and to improve outcomes for people. So that translation is super important. And you're right, the politicians that oversee the structures, the systems, the way that we operate are so key to making that change. So, yeah, I would definitely advocate for any researchers out there to spend more time in Canberra, as annoying or frustrating as it is sometimes. So, yeah, Canberra for me, I went in February and again in March, and our focus has been on talking to as many people as possible. Mm-hmm. So obviously there are key areas that we're trying to focus in on: mental health minister, assistant minister, the health minister, and our education minister. But more broadly, I really wanted to talk to anyone that would take a meeting with me, because what I'm realising is that politicians don't spend much time thinking about this area. They respond to crises, and their policy decisions and their investments flow from that. And by this area, I mean the preventative space of mental health, and even going further than that, thinking about how we promote mental wellbeing. Mm-hmm. I think for a long time, mental wellbeing has been put into the warm and fuzzy kind of category of, it's for wealthy people who can go to a yoga studio and drink green smoothies, which is all well and good, but it's really nice to see a government actually starting to think about wellbeing more broadly, and there is a wellbeing budget that they're trying to develop. So hopefully that means they're thinking about all of the levers of government and how that influences wellbeing. Mm-hmm. And the other area that I think has been really overlooked is children's mental health. My advocacy work over the last couple of months has really been about talking about prevention, why it's important, why they should care about it, and also talking to them about kids' mental health. And they're pretty surprised when you talk to them about the stats. We know
really?
that, yeah, really surprised. Which is shocking because they should know it, but also encouraging because they're really interested in it.
Okay.
So, if you tell them that 1 in 7 primary school kids experience a mental illness, they're like, wow. And then you tell them that data is from 10 years ago, and they're like, really? I mean, it hasn't been collected more recently? And no, there's not actually that much national data that looks at kids' mental health. So we don't actually know the burden of disease, I suppose, in kids. But then, talking to them about the fact that 50% of all mental illness has its onset before the age of 14. So primary school is a critical time in kids' development. And also then flagging to them that there's actually federally no minister for children. We have a minister for early learning, we have a minister for youth, but we don't have a minister for children. So really trying to get that on their radar.
Yeah. What kind of age are you thinking for children? Like, what's the cutoff there?
I'm thinking 5 to 12, so that band between early learning and where youth traditionally comes in to our thinking at around that 13, 14 mark, I think.
Yeah. So kind of like primary school.
Exactly.
Primary school age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so you've had 2 meetings there. Obviously, you got invited back, or
no, I just forced my way.
Yeah.
Forced my way. Yeah. I've met with now about 20 different ministers over the last couple of months, and the reception has been consistent across the board. They're really interested. They're pretty shocked about the stats, but I'm not seeing the traction in terms of commitment to make a difference yet, but hoping that the national strategy for children's mental health and wellbeing that was handed down over 18 months ago now, hopefully that will be the starting point for them in taking action.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, people would look, we come across this all the time about sort of commercializing research and commercializing wellbeing solutions and these sorts of things. And I get that probably some people do it the wrong way and whatever, but you're the CEO of a company. You're not really incentivized, to go out there and be just fighting the cause. So where do you see?
Yes and no. Yeah. We're Smiling Minds are not for profit.
Yeah.
So I suppose that makes us a little bit different
Sure.
to a commercial entity. I see our role as being an advocate for change and for maybe some voices that aren't being listened to or heard. I see our role as really championing a different approach and trying to broaden the way that we think about mental health. And I know, Matt, you're involved in this piece of work as well, really trying to help people understand the breadth of what mental health is and how we proactively look after it.
Yeah, and so obviously I'm guessing you're not going to Canberra just saying mindfulness is the only solution?
Definitely not. No, I think, I use your research all the time, actually, to tell politicians that there are a number of different strategies, and like there's different levels of evidence, and we have to have a consistent approach. But really the main focus is we have to get in early, and we have to teach skills and build kids' capabilities before crisis hits.
Yeah. And that's being pretty widely accepted.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting. I think mindfulness is an interesting one, isn't it? And I'm sure you've come across this in your work as well, but people have different reactions to mindfulness. Some people feel like it's a bit woo-woo still and it's only for alternative people. Some people feel like it's been commercialised and it's, a bit too mainstream. Other people really resonate with mindfulness. So I am a big advocate for mindfulness. I think it plays an important role in helping us focus our mind, to build our awareness, to build our capability to pause and not react, but to respond in a really thoughtful way. But I think there are broader approaches to and strategies that we have to teach that help people build that I suppose that toolbox, that breadth of strategies that they can use in their lives. And, for some people, mindfulness isn't going to be for them. So we can't forget, we can't say, well, this is the only way to build your mental wellbeing. We have to have a broad approach, just like physical health, right? Like you don't say, if you can't run a marathon, then give up on physical health. Like we have a broad range of different things that we help people to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And so, great. When you're talking about mindfulness, like how would you sort of define that? I know that's a hard question, so I don't mean you don't have to give me the textbook answer, but what do you kind of just to paint a picture in people's mind?
Yeah, so the way I describe it, so mindfulness for me is a state of well-being, I suppose. So I really like Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition. So paying attention to the present moment with openness, curiosity, and without judgment. And for me, that's sort of there's two bits to that. The first is the skill of being able to pay attention. And in terms of a state, it's like, how do you bring that into your everyday experience so that you're fully present, you're fully aware, you're focused on what you're doing right now? Like, for example, me talking to you, I'm here with you, I'm not going to look at my phone that's flashing at me and, there are other things happening. So, that's learning how to be, no worries, being fully present. But then the second part I think is really important as well, because it's not just about being present in any old way, it's about being present with openness, curiosity, and without judgment. And I think sometimes that's the harder part, actually, to actually listen to people in an open and curious way, and to try and reduce our amount of judgment, because we all make pretty quick, decisions on what's good or bad, what's right or wrong. There's lots of those things that happen in our life. So I think for me, it's about trying to cultivate that however I can, and bring that attitude and approach to as many of my interactions and my day-to-day life as possible. And the way, the evidence tells us that the best way to become more mindful is to practice meditation, because you're purposefully training your mind to be aware, but to be open, curious, and non-judgmental as well.
Yeah, the curiosity bit always gets me. I notice this when we've got 2 little kids at home, and I notice when they're crying, like even when they're a baby, like from a couple of months old, when they were crying, if you could get them curious about something, like that just switched off that side.
Totally. Yeah. It's that attention switch, isn't it? And that's, I think, kids are really good examples of that. They are naturally really curious about things. They're touching, they're eating, they're smelling things. It's, sometimes it's a bit too much and you worry about how safe they are, but they're really curious. And I think as we age, we lose some of that curiosity. But I think you're right, that idea of, if you can foster curiosity, it can actually change how you feel or the way that you see the world. That you can go from being quite critical or negative about something to being, I suppose, surprised or in wonder of something.
Yeah, it's like it suspends that judgment that you were talking about. Being curious is like, let's just pause on the judgment for a minute. You mentioned our research, and so we did that really large systematic review that the listeners will have heard you talk about a little bit. And we were blown away at how effective, or just firstly, how much research there was on mindfulness, and it is mostly meditation, like you say, but how much was out there, that it had been conducted in clinical populations, which I think you might have done a little bit of work yourself, Addie, how much in the general population, in those with a physical or mental illness, but just how effective it was. And so seeing how effective it was, we obviously were trying to build that wellbeing program as a result of that, and so that meant mindfulness was front and center. And the bit for us that was so exciting was, we kind of, as we've spoken about in the past, Addie, we had that idea of let's give autonomy back to the individual. So we say mindfulness is really important, but it's actually up to you to decide how you want to practice that. Yeah. And you can do it in a physical way, like yoga, or even just going for a walk mindfully. You can do it with apps, and I'm always surprised, I probably shouldn't be, how popular Smiling Mind actually is and how well known it is. I don't mean surprised as if people actually like that thing. I mean, it's so good to hear that it's out there and people it's really front of mind.
Yeah, I'm surprised as well. Every day, the number of new people that download the app, it's amazing, really, that it's so, people love it. And little kids all the way through to adults love it, which is, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, so tell us about the app anyway. How, just for context, can you share how many downloads it is a day or whatever?
Yeah, oh gosh, per day I'm not 100% sure, but we have about 1 million downloads every year.
Really?
So we're at about 8 million downloads of the app now, or we're just under 8 million. Yep. We've seen this pretty good hockey stick growth over the last, we're 11 years old now. Wow. So, and the last few years that we've seen a lot of downloads. As you can imagine, over COVID, 2020 in particular was our biggest year. I think we had almost 1.5 million downloads of the app. And it was, we were seeing upwards of 700,000 people using the app every month.
Really?
So huge demand for the app. And it's interesting, it's such a breadth of different types of people that use it. So when we first built the app, when our founders first built the app before my time, it was really geared towards children. So they built it for kids and for young people. And they pilot tested the programs with a whole bunch of different people, including parents and teachers and kids themselves. And the overwhelming feedback from those people that tested it was, this is great, but we need an adult section because we love it. We need programs for adults as well. So that was brought into the app. And yeah, now we have, out of the 8 million, about half of them are probably parents, teachers and young people, kids and young people. So lots of people using it for either kids themselves or as like the adult intermediary with kids. Yep. And then a whole bunch of adults that are using the program. Excuse me. And we've been lucky enough to work with a whole lot of different organisations and different partners to introduce the app to different audiences. So, you know, we've worked with IBM in the US and supported all of their employees. We worked with Virgin Australia and we have in-flight meditations on the in-flight system. We got to fly out and do a big meditation event with Richard Branson in one of their planes. Like, we've had these really interesting opportunities that have popped up.
Wow, cool. And so, you know, what do you hear? What's the feedback? Firstly, 8 million is a massive number. And to last, I mean, I'm obviously no expert of the tech world, but I think to last with an app for 11 years is just incredible.
Totally. Yeah, it's pretty, we've gotten through that hump of, like, what do they call it? The valley of death, that, you know, you don't get through it. I think we've gotten through it, which is a relief. What do we hear? Heaps of feedback. We get emails every day. We get like app reviews every day, and I think the overwhelming message from those is thank you, and we can't believe that this is a free resource for us to use. So that we're pretty proud of that we've been able to create something that's really high quality but still freely accessible. Yeah. And then there's those stories that stick with you. So, you know, I will never forget talking at an event about mental health at work, and we were in one of those big co-working spaces. I think it was WeWork in Sydney, and at the end I thought, this is a bit like, this session's not that exciting. I mean, are people really interested? The end of the session, this young guy came up to me and said, just wanted to say thank you. And I was like, have we met before? Like, tell me, you know, why? And he said to me, if your app hadn't been introduced to me at work, and he used to work for IBM, I probably wouldn't be alive now. And I was like, whoa, wow, you know, tell me a bit more about that. And I think the story for me illustrates the power of, like, I've never met him before, and, you know, we've never had a personal interaction, but he picked up the app and he gave it a go. And it gave him a tool to manage how he was feeling and then to go and seek help as well. So I definitely for 1 minute would never say that an app can cure all. It definitely can't, but I think it can be the gateway to people seeking the right support.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And I guess if you take your CEO hat on and put your clinical psychology hat on, like, you can imagine that people would roll their eyes, like, oh yeah, like, as if just practicing mindfulness 2 days, you know, whatever, 10 minutes a day is going to make a difference. Because, you know, they might be thinking that there are, you know, histories of trauma and structural issues that are affecting this person. Like, how would you respond to those?
Yeah, God, great question. I'd probably agree with them. So I would say that I was in the skeptic camp for a long time. And interestingly, my mum and dad were really into meditation when I was younger, and I thought they were crazy. But it's interesting, I think, where I ended up in my career. Like, at the start of my clinical career, I started working with people with cancer, and you know, that is a situation that you can't change. You have a physical illness that, you know, you're at the whim of what your body is going to do and how effective the treatment is going to be. And sometimes that treatment is pretty invasive and debilitating itself. And I could see that some people struggled a lot with that experience, that uncertainty, the existential sort of stuff that you go through. And some people really thrived. It actually gave them a moment to think about the value of life and the people in their lives and, what they wanted to get out of it. And for me, for some of those people, the difference was their ability to sit with that, the uncertainty. And for me, you can help people get to that point when they can open themselves up to practice mindfulness. So there's mindfulness actually can give people that pathway, not for everyone, but for some people it really helps them be able to open themselves up to that. So yeah, I think I get it when people are skeptical, how can actually sitting and breathing, change the world? Well, probably can't by itself, but it gives people a practical strategy that they can apply to whatever they're going through. And if they're able to, it gives them a place to look at themselves and how they feel.
Yeah, I want to go on to the change the world thing in a sec, but we've actually been delivering our wellbeing program to cancer survivors at the moment, and we're probably assuming that people like post-treatment would be sort of engaging with the program. We sort of left it open because we thought we don't know when, people would like to engage in this program. So that's kind of a finding in its own right. And actually it was people like mostly early on in their treatment who came along to the program. And because like mindfulness is a big component of ours, I couldn't even, I really was surprised by how many people were saying like, this is, if for nothing else, this is helping me sleep at night. And it's like that, just like that if all you did was use mindfulness before you sleep, you don't even get to the end of the script because you've fallen asleep, that is life-changing in its own right.
Yep.
So how do you, like, if you had to sort of say like, oh, that's a concrete, like you say, it's kind of like this blurry thing, I'm just sitting and breathing. All right, if you say, but at least it can help you sleep better at night, like what are some of the other sort of more concrete outcomes that you would hear?
Yeah, sleep is the biggest one. And interestingly, sleep for us is our most popular program in the app. And, it kind of goes against the traditional view of mindfulness that it shouldn't be for a particular purpose. We know we are all humans and we want to solve problems, and that is the pathway for lots of people to try mindfulness. So that's what it is. But yeah, sleep is massive. I think, what else do we hear? We hear people say that they feel like they're better listeners.
You could actually feasibly use to
and that means that they can be better
well-being,
workmates, leaders, colleagues, partners. Like there's that flow-on effect that, I'm actually showing up in a different way and I feel like I'm a better person because of that, because I can reduce the busyness in my head and I can just focus on what I need to focus on. So that definitely happens. And I think stress is a big one as well, that not everyone will feel calmer when they practice mindfulness, but for a lot of people it is the first thing that they notice, that they're, just stopping and pausing, they start to notice that their shoulders are really hunched or tense and they can relax them. They recognise that their breathing might be rushed or, they're breathing, shallowly into their chest, and they can change that. And that, I think, can be really powerful as well, understanding that you've got a few techniques there to reduce stress, because we all feel stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so really nice. I love what you're saying there about people being problem solving, because I think a huge part of our focus, but I mean, not that really matters, but a huge thing that I think the world should be going towards is this idea of like, how do we actually get people to engage in this stuff? And like you said, it's basically human nature that we're problem solving people. You've got a preventative solution, which doesn't necessarily align then to human nature.
Yeah.
But they do have problems, and even if they're sort of like your minor day-to-day problems, and that's where you can embed some problem solving there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, I know I'll probably keep coming back to this alignment, but for me, physical health there's a lot to learn from. Like there's been this shift in physical health where, back in time, not that long ago, actually participating in exercise wasn't really the done thing because our work was quite physical. We didn't need to. But then there was this movement towards, running and aerobics and things like that started that move towards being more proactive in our exercise patterns. And there are different motivators, aren't they, for people participating in exercise. It might be that your doctor has said, hey, you need to lose a bit of weight, or your blood pressure's too high, so you need to get that down, or you're, borderline diabetes, so you need to be more active. Like, there are those nudges that can push people into exercise. But by and large, most of us exercise now because we know that it makes us feel better, and we've brought it into our everyday health routine. That there's a routine around exercise. So I would love it. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get mental health into that phase where it isn't because I'm really stressed or I'm burnt out or I'm, hugely anxious about work, that I'm seeking some sort of solution, whether that's going and seeing a clinician or accessing an app like ours, to being more like, well, this is just part of my everyday routine. I take 20 minutes every day to do my yoga stretches, and I'm also going to take 20 minutes a day to do my mental health exercises as well.
Yeah, and so, we hear this all the time. Again, it's this thing of like, so you have a very valid solution, I think, and like you said, it's not for profit, it's amazing. Do you get pushback of like, there's obviously, I think there's immediately naysayers in the sense of like, yes, but it's not good for everyone, it can have harmful effects, but also that, like I can imagine you go to Canberra. I've never been to Canberra. I haven't met that many politicians, but I imagine you go to Canberra and that you're saying, here's this crisis. They're saying, all right, what's the solution? And I don't think you're out there saying like, this is the solution. It's a part of it. But people don't seem to be able to make that, they can't see that this is one part in a wider system that needs to change.
Yeah, absolutely. It is only one part of the solution. So, like, if we switch the dial and we said, okay, we're going to put all of our money into prevention and we're going to shut down all the clinical services and the crisis services, we would be in a world of pain. People would it would be a disaster. So it's definitely not the solution in and of itself. Yeah. But that's the same again with physical health, right? So if you shut down all the hospitals and said, we're not going to treat cancer anymore because you guys have to be more preventative and you have to exercise and eat better and stop smoking and drinking, like, we would be in a world of pain as well. But what we have recognised with physical health is that we do have to also focus on prevention, so that we reduce the burden on the healthcare setting. And, skin cancer is a really good example of that, that there was amazing work done to help people understand that getting burnt was really bad for you. So how can you proactively work to stop that? So that's my message when I'm talking to politicians about mental health and the breadth of different approaches. In terms of the first part of your question, we get lots of questions about, is it, like, what does the evidence say? Is it appropriate for everyone? Can mindfulness be harmful for some people? And look, my answer to that is, everything, you have to try things, like all things, with an open mind that this may not be right for every single person. And if people are experiencing really significant distress, or they do have a history of trauma, and there's a potential that it could trigger some of that, then don't use our app alone. Do it with a clinician. And so that's always our message. I also think sometimes that like products like ours, because it's bucking the trend a little bit, like particularly when we first started, bringing mindfulness into a digital platform was not really the thing to do, and it was not the traditional, so we weren't taking people through the 8-week MBCT course with 90 minutes a day and, huge support around it. We were introducing mindfulness in a really free, I suppose, way that people could use it however they wanted to. and we had lots of pushback on it at the start, but less so now because apps are so widely used, and we know now that it can actually reach a whole lot of people that wouldn't have been reached otherwise. So there are trends, I think, in terms of what people are accepting of.
Yeah. Well, and what kind of pushback was it?
It was that really, that, you're not going to get any benefit. It's not adhering to the evidence-based approach that had been evaluated most deeply. And our philosophy, our founders' philosophy back then, and still our philosophy now, is you can build the most amazing evidence-based program, but if it's not going to get to anyone, it isn't worth anything. So for us, it's about finding the right dose to have a benefit, but making sure that is actually accessible to people. And we're finding that in schools in particular at the moment, that, schools are really overloaded and teachers have no time for anything. And our original model was to do 3-day intensive training with teachers before they started our program, and there's absolutely no way that they will do that now.
My wife's a primary school teacher, so I'm all about that. I understand.
There you go. Yeah. So we were being a bit too purist. We were naive, and I think where we've got to now is that we'd rather schools engage with the program than not at all. And what we want to try and do is take a gateway approach. So how do you introduce these concepts to a school so that they get a feel for them, they can see some benefits, and then how do we deepen that engagement and that, hopefully, the impact for their students over time. So, and that won't always go well with, purist academics that... I'm pretty open about that. I'm a pragmatist, and I think my biggest driver is how do we get these strategies into the hands of as many people as possible in the safest way possible, but also not putting too many barriers in place or hurdles that we have to get over for that to happen.
Yeah, and it's also just I've had a bit of a mental blank, but it's like it's the barrier to entry, I think, is what I was going to say. If you do this sort of, you can start this in a very low, in a very easy way, right? The barriers have been removed for you. And I'm thinking of the guy at IBM, particularly males, they don't go and seek help for a million reasons. But if there's something that they can do privately, which is click a link that, was in a workplace intranet or some app that got downloaded on their phone, it's there. And if they then go on, that can easily be the gateway to furthering this journey, either of recovery or treatment or whatever it might be.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly our philosophy. That barrier to entry needs to be low. And I think that's part of our challenge at the moment, that we have got terrible rates of mental illness and people are suffering, and that is because our system is very much geared towards it actually makes it pretty hard for us to get support. To get onto a mental health care plan, you have to go and see a GP. Then you have to call the psychologist and probably go on a waiting list, and it's hard.
So thinking of where we could go with this, there's a lot of directions. All right, just before we go into the other solutions, just in terms of pushback, has there been a Buddhist pushback at all that you're aware of in mind? Maybe not for your app specifically, but in terms of mindfulness, the separation of this thing from its religious roots?
Yeah, a little bit, but I'm always amazed by, and I think maybe this is part of the Buddhist philosophy, isn't it? It's that when I've had the opportunity to talk to Buddhist monks about what we do and how we, there's parts of it that have come from their
That's a thing that you've
philosophy.
Done before?
Yeah, totally. I'm always amazed that there's so much curiosity from their end, and I think they really do embody that definition that we were talking about before, that there's real openness to thinking about how this applies in the modern world, and curiosity to hear, is it working? Are people really responding well to that? I think there is, And, we probably have lost something, I think, in that separation of mindfulness from the ethics and the philosophical part of Buddhism. But I think if people are interested in that, they will find it as well.
Exactly. I agree with that. I think that's the answer.
Yeah, so it's how do we break it down, like we were saying before, into, a low entry point so that it can be a starting point, and then open up people's minds to exploring, what else could this mean? And that, like, I've had that experience working in cancer as well, that working with older men who, I was like, have you heard of meditation? And they're like, no, what is this? What is this thing you're talking of? And then I explain it to them, and they're like, oh, it sounds a bit hippie. And so then introducing
worse language
it.
Than that.
Yeah, probably. But then, I've definitely had that experience where they've really taken it on, and then started going to Buddhist ashrams to learn more about the philosophy that sits behind it. Yeah, I've been amazed by how open and curious people can be.
Yeah, and that's the point. I don't know whether I just feel like people don't get that in general. That when when we are talking to in this kind of capacity, like, yes, you've lost something like by separating it, but you would have lost everything if Smiling Mind didn't exist.
Yeah, or if
because that man was never going to go and sign up to a Buddhist course. I don't know what's involved, but I'm guessing it's more than downloading an app.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally. And I think, that's the thing, I suppose, about like the movement in the 70s for John Kabat-Zinn to bring mindfulness into that medical model, I think paved the way for a Western view of mindfulness and how we use it. And I think, maybe over time there's also a coming together of those two philosophies and approaches. And there's definitely pushback on, the idea of McMindfulness, where people are just trying to make money out of mindfulness. I'm aware of that, the breadth of different experiences for different people.
Sure. And so on the McMindfulness, I haven't really heard that before. That's good. So you're up, there are lots of different mindfulness apps that are out there. They're for profit. They must be some of the biggest apps, I think.
Yeah, in the world.
That I can think of. For the sake of Smiling One, I'm going to mention their names, but how hard is it?
People know about them.
Yeah, okay, cool. They might even sponsor the show. No, I'm joking. How difficult is it to compete with, you're a non-for-profit. I can imagine that people are looking for more ethical businesses, so being a non-for-profit probably is to your advantage in some way. Yep. How hard is it to compete with these big organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. In some ways hard, but in other ways not hard. So I would say that, it's interesting. I always thought that people who were looking for a meditation app would be drawn either to our two biggest competitors, Headspace or Calm. I'm happy to say their names, Matt. They're really good. They're great apps.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they're not evil companies. Yeah,
they're not evil companies, although they are commercial, right? So they're trying to make money out of it, which that's fine. I think if people are willing to pay for something, then that shows the value that they place on what they're getting out of it, which is awesome. But it is super interesting to see, again, some of the app reviews that, people will say, I've tried Headspace, I've tried Calm, I love Smiling Mind. Yeah. And I would honestly say it's not we don't have a better platform. We obviously have invested way less into our tech because they've, I think Calm's, raised billions of dollars of investment, and we are nowhere near that. But we have our own different, unique style. And I think there's something about the Australian accent that people really love, and there's something about our approach to mindfulness that people really love. So I like to say that we are stealing a bit of the market share from Headspace and Calm, bringing it across to our Australian little app. But also I think people do resonate with the for-purpose part of our business, that we're here because we believe it can make a difference, and it's free as well. So we also recognise that we we want it to be available to anyone, not just people that can afford it. So that's been a big driver for us to make sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible. And that means we get to do amazing projects. Like we've collaborated with the NPY Women's Council up in Central Australia and developed meditations in 2 Indigenous languages, Pitjantjatjara and Yanganjara, and we've collaborated with schools in the Katherine region and developed resources in Creole, and worked with refugee communities across Melbourne and developed meditations in Arabic and Dari, so Afghanistan's language. And like, commercial companies probably wouldn't do that because it's not going to make any money, but we've been able to do it, and it's been a real joy to work with those communities to create programs in different languages.
Wow. Have there been cultural differences that you'd have to sort of consider when you do that?
Yeah, definitely. And the way we've done it is like co-design. So we're not experts in any of those language groups or cultural groups, but those cultural groups approached us and said, we'd love to create something. Yeah. For the women in the NPY Women's Council, they had been doing meditation practices with an interpreter in the room, so they'd been playing our app.
Really?
Then an interpreter would interpret it into the right language, and they'd be practicing, and then they decided that they would reach out to us and say, could we actually record some meditations in language? And for me, that was really interesting experience because it was built from their experience of country and their philosophies rather than a pure academic sort of formula of how a mindfulness practice should be run. So they're their own meditations. They wrote them, we helped guide them, and then put them in the app.
Wow. Can you, I don't want to put you on the spot, Kate, but can you remember what those differences were? Like, the sort of the academic versus the cultural?
Yeah, so for them, what was the difference? Well, it went in lots of different ways. So for them, there was a lot of visualization and the connection to country. So the 2 different groups are in quite different geographic regions. And so for one, it was the rocky hills that they wanted to help people sort of transport their mind to. Excuse me. And the other were sand dunes. So they used a lot of almost visualization work, which isn't that common in traditional mindfulness practice. It's more about tuning into your breath. So that was really interesting for me to let that go and say, this is great, you do what is right for you guys. And for them, connection to country was really important.
Awesome. Wow, that's cool. All right, so I want to change pace slightly because the academic world, we're probably going to talk about this a fair bit. It's not the easiest world. It's not the most fun world to be a part of. And there is a bit of an exodus, I think, around the world of people moving from academia into industry. And from the articles I've read, people a lot of people have this experience where they go like, oh, I didn't think I had any skills that were useful outside of academia. So you've made that transition, if I've understood correctly. Can you tell us a little bit about what was the inspiration for that move and how you found it?
Oh, that's a really great question. I was probably one of those people that thought, how could I do that job? It's a beast, isn't it? To put it bluntly, I think the academic world, there's a clear hierarchy, there's a progression. It's very much based on your research output, your publications, all of those metrics that are they're pretty specific to academia. I think for me, I started getting it was a combination of academia and the clinical world for me. I always had that dual approach, so I was always much more of an applied researcher than a pure academic researcher. And I was frustrated with the lack of change. I think I'm someone that needs to see things improving for me to feel motivated to keep working on it. And that traditional hierarchical kind of model, I don't know, it's kind of stifles innovation, and, there's lots of hoops that you have to go through to get anywhere. So that was probably the driver for me to start thinking about, well, where do I want to go? And interestingly, I was like trying to think, okay, do I go more academic and, get a job at a university, or do I go the other way? And I was probably more thinking about the academic pathway until this opportunity came up, and I got it was literally, tap on the shoulder from a former boss of mine that said, "Hey, did you know that these guys are looking for a CEO?" And I was like,
really?
"Oh, yeah,
Oh, you went straight from where were you working, in the hospital, or
yeah,
straight from hospital straight to CEO?
yeah, ridiculous." But like
Really?
a CEO of a tiny organisation that
Sure.
at that time
Okay.
there were 3 staff. It was a startup, right? Like
Okay.
it was, a big title for a startup job.
Yeah.
So of course I had all of those doubts, like, how can I do this job? I have
I
no
think that was
qualifications.
even me. I guess I was doubting you too, Addie. I was thinking there would have been like an MBA and then all these other things. No,
No,
that's cool. I mean, that's what they
no.
say about research anyway, right? Once you're leading projects and stuff like that, you are managing staff, you're managing budgets, you're applying for funding. There are lots and lots of different roles, and I think that's a classic story, isn't it? Like people who are really good at research get promoted, and then they're not researchers anymore, basically. Despite what their job says, they're business people, and they're
Yeah.
not very good at it often.
Yeah, well, some of them are
Like
and
in
some of
terms
them
of like
aren't. Yeah,
managing people and all these sorts of things.
totally. Yeah, well, exactly. It's a massive learning curve, isn't it? To go from that independent piece. But you're right. I think a lot of researchers will be managing a team of people and managing budgets and figuring out where the next bit of funding is going to come from. So that's the skill set that I've brought across to this job, because that's what it is. It's about looking at strategic direction. Where are we going? How do we fund it? How do we bring partners on board? How do we create really high performing, engaged teams of people that care about what we're doing? But yeah, there's been a lot of learning along the way. So the way I've done that is really probably more informal learning. So lots of mentoring, lots of collaboration with peers and with other people that have walked this pathway before me. So trying to learn from other people.
Great. So what if you had to say what was the most useful thing that you've brought over from academia?
Oh, probably my analytical mind.
Okay.
I think that being able to look at something and dissect it and then bring it back together and try reposition it. And I would definitely say that particularly working in this space, I'm using my psychology research brain all the time because we're tackling similar things. It's just in a different environment. So I think the biggest change, though, is the comfort in the structure in academia isn't here, because we have to create what that looks like all the time. So there's a bit more pressure from that
That's
perspective.
actually a nice question of what do you miss? Because I think that's probably something I haven't heard.
Yeah. Well, I think I miss... What do I miss? I miss the safety, I think, in the... that unit that, if you're at a university or you're in a hospital, it's been there for a while, it's pretty stable. Sometimes.
I'm just thinking, for all the people who are on short-term contracts.
I know.
It's just like, so then there's nothing to miss. Don't
There's
worry
no,
about it.
well, no, let me think of something else then.
No, I'm joking. It's okay.
I think I miss the deep thinking as well.
Okay.
In my work, like I said at the start, it does feel frantic a lot of the time, and I'm context switching a lot. So I'm moving from deep strategic thinking about, where do we want to go with our program, what impact do we want to achieve, through to writing a grant application, through to jumping on a radio interview with a journalist from some random radio station that doesn't know anything about what we do, and they're going to ask me ridiculous questions. It's a lot of juggling, and then managing people as well. So I think I had a bit more protected time, I think, in my academic career.
Interesting. Have you made efforts to protect your time a little bit, or is it just
I
not possible?
try. No, I think sometimes it's not possible and things will happen, but no, I definitely try and protect some time. Yeah, we have Wednesdays that are supposed to be meeting-free Wednesdays, so
nice.
we all have deep thinking time, and that's the whole organisation.
How many people is that now, by the way?
About 35.
Oh, really? Whoa, so from 3 to 35.
Yeah.
So you've done a great job.
Well, still a way to go, but yeah. yeah, we've grown a lot. We're doing some really great things. So, yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we've been able to achieve.
Amazing. So on those great things, I'm going to butcher the name. I don't know how to pronounce this shop, but is it Decuba? I'm sorry. Decuba. I'm so sorry.
No.
You've recently had a success with them. Could we go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have written a 5-year strategy with a 10-year goal. And that for us was about thinking, what role do we want to play in the mental health landscape? What are our strengths? Where do we want to, what legacy do we want to leave in terms of the work that we're doing? And as a not-for-profit, all of our revenue and resources should be going into making a change in the world. So for us, we've set our sights on creating generational change in mental health, which I mentioned, and we had this opportunity to talk with the CEO and the owner of Decuba. So big retail brand. I think they've got about 150 stores across Australia, probably the most well-known to, young-ish Australian women, but they have kids stores as well. And it was one of those experiences where you meet someone and the connection is just you kind of get it, and they really got what we were trying to achieve. So it was a connection through Jane, our chair and co-founder, and Tanya meeting, just an incidental meeting, and then that led to a couple of meetings with Tanya and Jill, who runs the foundation. Okay. And we pitched a big idea to them that, we want them to help us take a really big step towards achieving our goal and to help us broaden our content and I suppose build our capacity in our advocacy work. So we had really clear, tangible goals that we wanted to achieve over the next 3 years. And I think, it's one of those, right place, right time situation, and Tanya has and the Decuba Foundation have agreed to support us significantly. So $3.6 million over 3 years, which is, our biggest support ever.
Incredible. I mean, in the scope of sort of philanthropy in Australia, that's massive, right?
It's really massive, yeah. And I think for me, it really shines a light on there are probably people in our community that have the capacity to give that we may not have ever been asked before or haven't thought about philanthropy before. And I think Tan and the Decuba Foundation are pretty new in their giving. They're ramping it up, which is pretty inspirational because, it's so easy, isn't it, to get stuck in your everyday running a business and not thinking about what impact you want to leave on the world. It's hopefully there's going to be more and more of those amazing people that decide that they have the capacity to do a lot more.
Cool. Yeah. Can you share what the idea was that what it was that you pitched to them, or?
Yeah. Well, it was that generational change piece.
What does that mean?
We want to get. Yeah. So the 3 key pieces to it was broadening our content. So thinking about mindfulness plus other things, mostly based on your paper, Matt, thinking about, what is the evidence-based best approach for us? So it will start to be positive psychology in addition to mindfulness practices, so extending that. We're going to talk about mental fitness a lot more than what we have in the past. And
to replace a term or...
Well, so we lead with mindfulness a lot. Yep. So what we're trying to do is reposition it to not be about the practice or the technique, but the outcome that people can achieve. So it isn't about getting rid of mindfulness. It's more about talking about how do we help motivate people to get to that end point or that state that they're trying to get to. And for us, that we think is mental fitness. Yep. still a bit of work to do to refine that.
Language is like, that's why I asked, because it's such a hard challenge that we find. But anyway, so that was two streams. There was a third one, I think.
Yeah. So, and then investing in our advocacy and impact work. So looking at how we strengthen our ability to evaluate our programs, but then use that for advocacy work. And hopefully in the not too distant future, establishing a kids mental health advisory board who can help us get insights from children. You know, it's interesting to see like that there actually isn't any national group that accesses children to get their insights into how they're going and what they're doing. So we think that there's a really important role to play in convening a group of kids, probably their parents as well, to really help us understand what they need.
Great.
So,
no, this
yeah.
is exciting. We've got a 3-year-old, so in 2 years when he goes to school,
Great.
we'll be ready.
Bring him over.
Yeah, great. All right, cool. So how, like, this is maybe a weird question, I guess, but my question, I'll give some words around it, but how hard was it? So you just won $3.6 million. How hard was it to win? And why I'm asking that question is that I think we've worked really hard in the past for like $10,000, and then a $20,000 kind of opportunity falls in your lap, and you think, we worked so much harder for the 10 than the 20. How did that kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. You're right. I think what I have learned, fundraiser is in my bio now, but you know, I wouldn't have ever thought that I was a fundraiser before taking on this job, but I've learned how to fundraise because you have to find funds to do what we're doing. But I've also learned along the way that getting $10,000 is about the same amount of work as $1 million.
Okay.
Which is ridiculous. The problem is the opportunities for those bigger ones are so much smaller. They're not as easy to find. So I think what I've learned along the way though is it's refining your message, having a clear strategy and tangible things that people can fund that make it easier. And if you can do that in a way so you've got, like, it's almost the same message whether you're pitching for $10,000 or $1 million. Obviously the deliverables and, you know, the project detail might need to be a bit different, but I think that consistent message is really important. And there has definitely been times throughout my time at Smiling Mind where, like, I've just been really reactive and I'm chasing anything. But I think when I stick to when we have written a strategy, we've got a clear plan for where we want to go, and I'm consistent in that message, it rings much more true to people that want to invest in you. And I think that's the thing to remember as well, that people are usually donating or investing in you, in your mission and your belief that it can make a difference, not in the specific details. Obviously you do need the specifics as well, but when they're making a decision, it's usually about your passion, your commitment, you know, that you're going to be there to see it through.
Yeah.
So that's really key, I think. Great.
And what do you think Cuba saw?
I think they really liked our big ideas. So they're pretty bold in their thinking. They want to reach 25 million people to help them look and feel amazing. And our goal's pretty big and bolshy as well, that we want to create generational change. We want to try and get our school program into every primary school in Australia. Like, we've got some pretty bolshy goals.
Yep.
Which, you know, we might not be able to achieve them, but it's better to have those goals than to not. So
sure.
I think that's the ambition and the conviction that we are going to do everything we can to get there is probably what resonated with them.
Nice. And I guess, I mean, you'd imagine as well there's like positive sort of reputational gains for them as well. Like, I know that what you said about young Australian women knowing all about it. My wife, like every Christmas, you know, we've got like young cousins and friends that have got kids that are like sort of that 13, 14-year-old. They all get from us these Takuba.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they do. And it's like, I don't know what it is about this shop, but they obviously clearly get it. And now I'm like really happy that that's what we've been doing for all this time. Cause,
amazing.
You know, we're kind of like investing in a company who's investing in the stuff we care about.
Totally. Yeah, I think they really do want to do good. And the foundation is doing really great things, helping lots of people. They do international aid. They've worked with the Australian Ballet. They work with grassroots community organisations like St Kilda Mums. We're pretty proud to have forged a partnership with the Cuba Foundation. I think and hopefully we can leverage that to drive more awareness of what we do, and to bring other people on board as well to help us get there.
Great. All right, cool. So, I mean, thank you again for your time. I don't want to hold you up too late. My last question is really just on what do you want to see in the world? We've covered it a little bit already, but I would just love to know, when you say, if we just focus on the schools, when you said you want to be in every every Australian school.
Australian plus South Australia.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. We feel like we get often overlooked. I'm not sure if we do or not, but what would that look like? And what would the change be?
Yeah. I would love to see a world where we don't automatically think of mental illness when we talk about mental health. That's my biggest frustration, is that we've conflated these two things together, and they're both really important to understand and to navigate. But I think we need to have a focus on human potential as well as treating and healing from illness. That we miss out on that opportunity, I think, if we only focus on treating illness, when we could be focusing on potential and building people's capabilities. So I'd love a world where when you talked about mental health, people kind of felt empowered to do something about it and to look after their mental health, no matter where they sit on that spectrum, even if they are experiencing a mental illness, half of us will. So that is really important to understand, that even if you are experiencing a mental illness, there are things you can do to build your mental well-being.
Yes.
I think for me, that's the shift that I want to see, that, and then, not to discard the progress that we've made, huge progress in building awareness around mental illness and helping people understand the complexity of our mental health. But I think, that next chapter, I'm hoping, will be much more about empowering and looking at human potential rather than just illness.
Okay. And then how do you see Smiling Mind contributing to that then in the next
year? Well, I would love us to be a really vocal champion for that movement, and we can't do it by ourselves. So I want to see us collaborating with as many people as possible, so that collective banding together of organisations and individuals that think the same way. I want us to be an agitator. So I don't want us to just sit back and think and hope that this is going to change. I want us to be a bit more bolshy and to really push it, which is why I'm trying to spend more time in Canberra. For you, Matt, and for anyone listening, if you've got amazing research that you think can help with this argument, get in touch with me, because I think, and I'd love to work more collaboratively to put that on the desks of our politicians, to help them understand that they can actually make a difference, and they should be taking this seriously. And then I want us to be that tool, Smiling Mind, to be the tool that anyone can use anytime. So it's in your back pocket. It is accessible to anyone. How do we get people using that tool?
Yeah.
Hopefully every day.
I know that I said I'll just ask one question, and I've since asked two questions, but I've just got one more just on that idea. Have you had any success, or do you have any interest in sort of being in the back pocket of GPs? Because I know that we often hear this idea that, we've got this stepped care kind of model in Australia where, we have different solutions for different levels of intensity of care.
Yeah.
But there doesn't seem to be very much in those low level steps.
Yeah.
Mindfulness obviously is the obvious thing to go there. Is Smiling Mind having much success in that?
Yeah.
World?
I think we could have more, but about 20% of our app users that we surveyed have been referred by a health professional. So
Really?
that's either a GP or a psych. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So it's a big number. So that's interesting. There was a study done. I can't remember who ran it. That looked at like a digital prescribing sort of process. So for a GP, the prescription pad is pretty much that one of the first things that you go to. So how would it work if we were to give GPs a prescription pad of other things, so not medication prescriptions, but it's sort of like that idea of social prescribing before social prescribing came on the radar. And Smiling Mind was the top one that they referred out of that study. So which shows like there's definitely awareness of our app, but yeah, there's so much more that could be done there, isn't there? Like, if you think about all the different cohorts of people that will go to their GP and talk to them about challenges that they're having, imagine all of the different amazing services that could be tapped into that GPs don't often know about. So yeah, there's a bit of work to be done there, I think, to connect that up.
Amazing. All right, Addie, thank you so much. It's Friday. We're recording on a Friday afternoon, so this has been a huge ask. I really
no worries, my pleasure.
Yeah,
my pleasure.
Really, it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much again. Is there anything we haven't covered that you just think like you'd love to get out there?
Oh, I don't think so. I think maybe. I think the other one final thing to maybe finish on is if you are a researcher, look after your mental health as well. That all of this stuff applies to us as much as it does to the people that we care for. So yeah, make sure you're getting time out and looking after yourself.
Yeah, I will take that extremely literally because this is the end of the week and it's the weekend. It's the weekend
now. Nice.
All right, thank you so much, Addie.
Thanks, Matt. Lovely to chat.
All right, Addie, thank you so much, Addie, for joining us on this episode. Another really interesting conversation. Just a reminder, if you enjoyed the episode, please stop what you're doing right now. Subscribe to wherever you're watching this thing, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Maybe subscribe to all three so that the stats look better and make me feel a bit better about myself. Just joking. But mostly send it to someone who you think would be interested. I think, Addie covered so much. So the challenges that young people face, the big mountain of work that we need to be doing to make sure that we're looking after young people, particularly primary school aged young people, and just the value of mindfulness. So thank you again, and see you next week.